Hello, this is the Fiction Nonfiction Podcast from Literary Hub, where we believe that every issue in your Twitter feed or on the evening news has already been tackled somewhere in literature. I'm Whitney Terrell, the author of the novel The Good Lieutenant.
And I'm V.V. Ganeshananthan, also known as Sugi, author of the novel Love Marriage.
And we've been doing this since 2017. Is this true? It's our season 3 finale, this episode?
Yeah.
I had no idea. I knew it was sometime around in here. Anyway, so what do you think of this year that we're having right now?
Can I say shitfest? Is that allowed? I think a lot of people are probably calling this year a dystopia, COVID-19, wildfires, hurricanes, enough already. And of course, this year, all of our troubles have both revealed and exacerbated existing inequalities like racial injustice and income inequality, both of which we've talked about a bunch on this show.
But there is a chance, or at least a hope, that the old political stories we've been telling for the 3 years that we've been doing this podcast might become different. For example, the accepted wisdom that the South belongs to Trump and to the conservative Republican Party, and white political power is always going to control that region. Maybe that will be different.
Well, I'm the one who grew up in the South, but you follow polling numbers as closely as anyone, so I know you don't think that's entirely true.
Well, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in the South, but I do know that if you look at polls and trends in polls, Maryland, which I don't know, you were from Maryland. Is that what you're calling the South?
I guess, technically it's below the Mason-Dixon line. I think these days it's the mid-Atlantic.
Okay, well, that's a Democratic state. Virginia, solidly Democratic now, and I think we're looking at whether or not, maybe the South, because of its diversity and its increasing change in demographics, might become a more democratic place. And also its literature is changing. So on today's episode, we'll talk about Southern literature and political realignments and increasing diversity in the South. Later in the show, we'll be joined by Michael Gora, the author of The Saddest Words, William Faulkner's Civil War.
But first, we're excited to welcome novelist Maurice Carlos Ruffin to the podcast. Maurice is the author of We Cast a Shadow, which was published by One World Random House. The novel was a finalist for the PEN Faulkner Award. It was longlisted for the PEN America Open Book Prize, the Center for Fiction Prize, and the Aspen Words Literary Prize. The novel was a New York Times Editor's Choice, and Ruffin is the winner of several literary prizes, including the Iowa Review Award in Fiction and the William Faulkner William Wisdom Creative Writing Competition Award for Novel in Progress. His work has been in the New York Times, the LA Times, the Oxford American, Garden and Gun, and Kenyon Review. A New Orleans native, Ruffin is a professor of creative writing at Louisiana State and the 2020-2021 John and Renee Grisham Writer-in-Residence at the University of Mississippi. His next book, The Ones Who Don't Say They Love You, will be published by One World Random House in 2021.
Welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Maurice, we really loved your book. What a cool and interesting premise. Your novel depicts a near future America in which dangers for people of color and specifically Black people have gotten much, much worse. And so it's set in an unnamed Southern college town, and your narrator, an unnamed African-American father, goes to great lengths to try to save his mixed race son from American racism. So, just kind of the dial of everything just turned way up. How did you decide to imagine that version of the future through fiction?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. When I started writing it, actually the book was not going to be about that at all. It was more about economic issues and my narrator trying to help his parents survive in Great Recession era America. But then Trayvon Martin was murdered, and that really made me revise my thinking on it. And I just wanted to explore what was going on, but I wanted to explore what was going on through the lens of where is it going to go next? I think I understood intuitively that whenever there's a movement towards equality, there's always a reaction from, quote unquote, conservative people. So we had Barack Obama in office. We had an era of, it seemed like improvement in race relations, things had sort of calmed down. And it just seemed like things were going to get a lot crazier, a lot faster than in the past. And so I just speculated, well, if I flash forward a few decades, where's it going to go if we don't correct some of these issues?
And my imagination of the book, basically like a future New Orleans. Am I wrong to think that?
More or less. I think anybody who's familiar with the city will recognize it. But people who don't know New Orleans, they can see it as almost any American city, but it's definitely a southern city.
I heard a really interesting podcast the other day from 538 where they were talking about the possibility, 538, the sort of polling site that is run by Nate Silver, about the possibility that reliably progressive and democratic states in the upper Midwest, like Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan, are actually trending in the direction of the Republicans because the Republicans are advancing this, like, we only care about white people platform. And there are many more white people there, right? Whereas the South, which has been reliably Republican for many, many years, is actually becoming increasingly diverse. And so like the directionality of the voting is tending Democrat there. And you have Virginia's already a Democratic stronghold at this point, and North Carolina's kind of on the edge. Georgia almost elected Stacey Abrams as senator the last time around. So I wonder where you think things are headed in the South right now, not in your terrible future that you've imagined for us, but now, you know, as a voting bloc coming forward in this election.
Well, you know, the thing about it is that everything is provisional. I think it is true that the pandemic, for example, has accelerated the tendency of people to not work in offices. People can't go to skyscrapers. You know, I spent over a decade working as a lawyer in you know, on the 30th and 40th floors of various buildings. And some people are saying that now, because you don't have to live in a city to make a living, people may go to suburbs and exurbs, and they may go to rural areas like Mississippi, Arkansas, Tennessee. And we've already seen that with Florida somewhat, with Georgia somewhat, as you mentioned. And so it's possible that we may see another reversal, where we've seen it in the past, where if you were, you know, a Republican in the Lincoln era, that meant you were for equal rights, for civil rights, right? And then it reversed between the 30s and the 60s, and by the time you get to the 1970s, if you were Republican, you were for segregation. You like George Wallace, you like Nixon. So these things go back and forth, and these alignments are a part of this way that we Americans think. We're very oppositional. This is a nation that really likes the fact that when you go into court, often it's a winner-take-all system. And so the way I see it, I think that people are fighting back really hard. I do have a slight worry that, you know, we are in this like second American Civil War where maybe you can't reconcile things, and we just decide, you know what, let's just like, you know, leave the coast to the blue folks and then take the entire middle part of the country and give it to the red folks. But I can't say that's going to happen. I think that we are going to compromise. The problem with some of our compromises, though, is that you get what happens in the book, where we sort of give up so many rights that eventually there are no rights left for certain people, whether they are Black folks or minorities or queer people, you know, you name it. And I think that the real trick here is that even in the current election, you know, if you are anti-Trump, you're going to vote for Biden. But chances are Biden won't give the young left and the really far-wing left what it wants, whether it's defunding police, whether it's you know, ensuring that voting rights are protected. And so if those people are feeling disenfranchised, we're kind of back where we started at. And that's just the way that things are here. It is a country where we're so heterogeneous, where we have to keep on making these compromises, even if it means that some people don't have any of the rights of the mainstream part of America.
It's interesting. I was, one of the really enjoyable things about your book for me is all of the cool, subtle historical references and like really data specific things. And I went and was sort of looking up current news coverage about things like Southern strategy, right? Which is was an official strategy of the Republican Party, which dates back to the Nixon era, where they sort of articulated it and named it. And we're sort of like, no, we don't actually need the nation to come with us. All we need is the South. All we need is the electoral votes of 11 Southern states. And I'm thinking here of a recent Paul Waldman column in the Washington Post, where he was sort of like, you know, that worked for the Republican Party the last time around. And I don't think that that's going to work this time. And I really, really hope that he's right. But I'm curious about like all of it's a very, considering it's a speculative future, like it's a remarkably like data in certain parts, there are these like data references that are very interesting. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, you mentioned earlier, I think part of the project was to turn the temperature up to 11. And, you know, I think it's one of the reasons why people can debate whether it's truly a dystopian novel or not. Because in the one sense, you know, if you're one of the white characters in the novel, it's not dystopian for you for the most part, at least in your personal being. You're not being tracked in the same way as the Black characters. So that literally, like every Black character in this city is being tracked by like a surveillance van, like their own personal surveillance van. And so
well, it's like Trump got what he wanted, and this is kind of what the I feel like the nationalist right would like America to be like in the future.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing is, I finished the book before Trump was elected. I finished it in 16. So this was during the election. I think he had just won the Republican nomination and had the convention, but I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And even to the point where there's a character in the book running for mayor who sort of, in my mind, sounds like Rush Limbaugh, but he also sounds like Trump, where he's like, take the immigrants and put their heads on stakes and yada, 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 all this sort of overblown rhetoric, which has become the norm. It used to be the idea of the whistle, the sort of dog whistle politics, and now it's the megaphone politics, where he literally says, hey, all you white folks in the suburbs, we're going to keep the poor Black folks and minorities out. And so that now the subtext is just the text. And it shows you that people are willing to embrace that. He has not really suffered in the polls as a result of saying those things. The polls have been remarkably stable. And so it tells you that people are now just kind of willing to be outwardly racist and anti-Black and anti-minority as much as possible, and feeling no side effects from that.
I feel like your book does a really impressive and terrifying job of bringing those consequences home, at least for me, it was a little bit like reading The Handmaid's Tale, where it just also set into like a terrifyingly plausible near future. So I wonder if I could ask you to read a little bit from the book. There's a passage that makes some of those references that I was talking about.
Sure, I would love to. Give me one moment to get set up here. This is chapter 16 of the book, and it's actually the most requested chapter, because I think that in this book, the narrator's doing a lot of things that are debatable as to whether they're good ideas in order to protect his son from racism. And so this is the part where he sort of turns to the reader and explains himself. So I'll read this section. I am a unicorn. I can read and write. I have all my teeth. I've read Plato, Virginia Woolf, Nikki Giovanni, and Friend. I've never been to jail. I voted in every election since I was 18 years old. I finished high school. I finished college. I finished law school. I paid my taxes. I don't have diabetes, high blood pressure, or the itis. If you randomly abduct 100 Black men from the streets of the city and deposit us into a gas chamber, I'll be the only one who fits that profile. I'll be the only one who survives. Now, is this because I'm better than the other 99? No, it's because I'm lucky. And I know I'm lucky. Somehow the grinding effects of a world built to hurt me have not yet eliminated my every opportunity for a happy life, as is the case for so many of my brothers. The world is a centrifuge that patiently waits to separate my son Nigel from his basic human dignity. I don't have to tell you that this is an unjust planet. A dark-skinned child can expect a life of diminished light. This is truth anywhere in the world and throughout most of human history. But let's stick to the home of the free. Place young Jamal on an all-white basketball team, and guess who will get ejected from the game more often for normal rambunctious behavior? Give a hiring manager a stack of applications. Let him choose between an equally justified Jamal, Jane, or Jonathan. See Jamal waiting at the unemployment office again. Now, admittedly, none of these examples are particularly shocking, and I fear that I risk insulting your intelligence, dear reader, but ride with me a while longer. See Jamal evicted from his apartment. See Jamal arrested for vagrancy. See Jamal mysteriously die in a transport van on the way to the city jail. A brief interlude of cursing the heavens. Resurrect Jamal with lightning, smoke, sparks, the smell of burning cocoa butter. Put a toy gun in Jamal's hand in an open carry state. Wait for Jane or Jonathan to call the police due to a suspicious looking Black guy. See the cavalry show up and scalp Jamal, no questions asked. Jane is so heartbroken for the tragic misapprehension of the situation. She says over a pumpkin spice latte as Jonathan bites the tip off a double chocolate biscotti. I, myself, have a natural aversion to numbers and statistics as they can be manipulated by any reactionary with an agenda. But that doesn't change the objective fact that prospects for my people have evolved ever since my grandparents' time Black women make 30 cents for every dollar a white man does. And 90% of Black moms are single mothers. Unemployment among Black males is the norm, not the exception. And 9 out of 10 brothers have done time. And virtually none of us Black guys and dolls can vote since felons and the children of felons need a voucher from an upstanding citizen to earn their voting pass. My white friend Jojo was my pass. None of that even takes into account the fact that every Black person is a de facto enemy of the state. They used to call bringing every able-bodied Black male to jail for questioning racial profiling. Now it's called excellent police work. Did I mention that Blacks in most major cities live in fenced-in ghettos, just like where I grew up in the Tico? There may be beauty in my Blackness and dignity in the struggle of my people, but I won't allow my son to live a life of diminished possibility. I see a constellation of opportunity that those of my ilk rarely travel to. I see my Nigel at the center of those stars.
Thank you so much. I find that passage just endlessly rich. And like your unnamed narrator, I have a natural aversion to numbers and statistics, but I couldn't help comparing the numbers in your book to our numbers now. He talks about, for example, Black women making 30 cents for every dollar that a white man does. And today, I think that number is around 62 cents to the dollar. And all of the rest of the stats you cite, single Black mothers, incarceration rates for Black men, all of these stats are about at least twice as bad as what we have now. And many of the ones that you have invented are way worse. And one thing you imagine there, you mentioned the vouchers and the restricted voting rights. And so you could read this as a grim prediction, or you could say if demographics in the South changes, Whitney's mentioned, and people can vote, they won't let this happen. And I was thinking of Stacey Abrams' push to fight voter suppression, which of course postdates your finishing the book, as you mentioned. How did you research and think about these numbers and problems, and where do you think those voting rights are headed now?
Yeah, I mean, there were so many things I was thinking about. So my editor at the time, Victory Matsui, read the passage, an early version of the passage, and Victory said, maybe you can go a little bit farther. Like I had already inflated things by maybe 50% or so. And Victory said, no, you can push it. You can just just max out and see how it feels to go as far as possible. And I think about the fact that so much of our life in America is about opportunity. So that, like I listen to conservatives do podcasts and radio shows to see what they're thinking, what they're talking about. And one thing they'll always say about women in particular is they'll say, well, there's no disparity between men and women. It's just women have different jobs. Their jobs pay less, that sort of thing. That ignores so many facts about people in the exact same job, about the way that they're treated in the jobs, about the opportunities for networking and career development and yada, 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 mentorship. But I just kept thinking, okay, so it takes just a few moves to get to these statistics. And then the scariest thing that I think about is the fact that even if people who believe in equal rights fight as hard as possible, you could have a situation like South Africa, where only 10% of the population is non-Black. And they're running the show, they're owning the property, the laws are all twisted so that they have all the rights, and therefore most are disenfranchised. And so I could imagine a scenario in America where, if the current president wins again and he, declares martial law, or they stack the Supreme Court so that it's like 8, conservatives and like 1 liberal, and they keep tearing apart voting rights, that people have to pay poll taxes even if they're not felons, and yada, yada, yada. And so it's a short jump to that place, because now what I see in the reaction of people who like the current president, they're all over America. It's not just Southerners. And the truth of the fact is, I've learned more about our history. Even in the time of like Lincoln, you had people in the North saying, who gives a damn about Blacks in the South, about these enslaved people? That's not our problem. Don't affect my checkbook. Don't affect my safety and my sovereignty. So all those thoughts kind of went into how I factored in these statistics in this feature.
So I noticed that on Twitter a few days ago, you wrote, we're going to look back and say 2020 was the best year because that's when we chose to make some changes. And I was really surprised and frankly delighted by your optimism, because I really could use some optimism right now. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that and what changes you think we need to make and who you think is going to make them.
Yeah, look, it's just a quirk of my personality where on the one hand, I'm able to see the darkest things. Like maybe I'm a goth in some ways. I can just see how ugly things can get very easily, but I'm also very optimistic. I do believe that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. And I come from New Orleans, which is a very optimistic place, and we've been destroyed a few times in our history. We have a lot of bad racism and a lot of bad economic policies that affect us in terms of education and other things. And my parents, I mean, just, my dad passed years ago, but they both have been and were such great optimistic people. It was always, doesn't matter how bad it gets, keep your chin up, it's going to be all right. And I believe in that. I think that in America, the shining light for me this year has been a few things. The most obvious example is that with George Floyd, we had, to my understanding, for the very first time in history, worldwide protests. I'd never seen that. You'd seen protests in the South, you've seen them in America, you've seen them in London, you've seen them in other places in the world, but the entire world. You had 50 states, I think 700 cities in America. You had Australia, Germany, Japan, all protesting on behalf of the rights of a person just to be alive and breathe. And as bad as it gets for people who are just pugnaciously against the rights of most people, there's always people willing to fight back. And it often comes from our youngest people. It comes from people who are just, they haven't lost that sense of possibility and hope. You get a little bit older, a little bit gray hair, lose some hair, you get some wrinkles, you kind of go, this is just how it's going to be for the rest of our lives. But we don't accept that. Young people are always like, no, we're going to fight. We're going to fight.
Maurice, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a huge pleasure.
The pleasure was all mine. And y'all take care, be safe, and vote.
Thank you. And in addition to voting, we would encourage our listeners to pick up a copy of We Cast a Shadow, which is available now at an independent bookstore near you. And you can follow, there's the picture of it for those of you watching on YouTube. You can follow Maurice on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to keep up on his latest projects. Thank you.